I knew it was wrong, but when he locked the door and whispered, "It's just a game," I couldn't stop. He was 52, my mother's husband, but what happened that night went beyond even my darkest fantasies. I thought I was in control. I was wrong. Mom had left for a business trip. A whole week. 7 days alone in the house with Jason. Jason was always perfect on the surface. Tall, broad shoulders, that calm, confident voice that could fill a room without ever getting loud. His dark eyes always seemed to know more than he let on. People trusted him, admired him. But I saw something different. Something sharp, something dangerous. I'd caught him watching me before. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A glance that lingered too long. A look that felt heavier than it should. But the more I noticed, the more I realized I wasn't imagining anything. I saw the way his eyes followed me when I thought no one was looking. And I felt it. But I never said a word. Not until that night. That night, I decided I wasn't going to look away. I knew what I was doing when I picked the red dress. It was tight, the fabric clinging to my skin like it was part of me. The neckline dipped low, revealing just enough to be suggestive, but not enough to be obvious. It was a dress that made a statement, and I was ready to see if he'd hear it. I took a deep breath before heading downstairs, my heart already racing. The house felt different without Mom there, quieter, like it was holding its breath right along with me. I could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass before I even reached the bottom of the stairs. Jason was in the living room, sitting in his usual spot on the leather couch, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his phone in the other. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow from the lamp casting shadows along the walls. When he looked up and saw me, everything shifted. His eyes didn't move. They stayed locked on me, dark and unreadable. I felt the weight of his gaze, heavy and deliberate, as it traveled over me from head to toe. "You look grown up, Mia," he said finally, his voice low and smooth, like he wasn't sure if he should be saying it out loud. But he said it anyway. He set his phone down and reached for the bottle of wine on the table. Without asking, he poured a glass and held it out to me. His eyes never left mine. I crossed the room, feeling his gaze burn into me with every step. When I reached him, our fingers brushed as I took the glass. It was a simple touch, but it felt like electricity shooting through my veins. I raised the glass to my lips, taking a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. The silence between us was deafening, thick with something unspoken. I could feel it pressing down on me, wrapping around me like a rope I didn't know I was already tangled in. Then, without warning, he stood up. He took the glass from my hand, setting it gently on the table. His movements were slow, controlled, but there was something simmering beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite name. And then he walked to the door. Click. The sound of the lock echoed in my chest louder than it should have. My pulse quickened. My breath caught. Jason turned back to me, his eyes darker now, filled with something I couldn't read. "Let's play a game," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin before he even touched me. "It's just a game. But before I tell you how that game ended, we need to go back. Because this didn't just happen out of nowhere. No, this had been building for years, creeping up on me until I didn't even realize how deep I was. It started when I was 16. Mom and I had just moved into a new house on the outskirts of town. A fresh start, she called it. But Jason? He was already in her life by then. They met at some charity event. He was the charming architect with the perfect smile, the kind of man who knew how to make everyone feel like they mattered. People loved him, trusted him. But from the very beginning, I saw something different. He was always calm, always in control. The kind of person who never raised his voice but didn't need to. His presence filled every room, and his dark eyes, they were like windows to something sharp, something dangerous. I caught him watching me even then, but I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But that summer changed everything. Mom went out of town for the weekend, visiting her sister a few hours away. It wasn't unusual. She trusted Jason completely. Why wouldn't she? He was the perfect man, the perfect husband, the perfect stepfather. Or so she thought. That evening, it was just Jason and me in the house. The air felt different, heavier somehow. I don't know what came over me, but I wanted to see if I was imagining it, if those lingering looks were just in my head. So, I tested him. I slipped on a pair of shorts, shorter than anything I'd usually wear, and a thin tank top without a bra. When I walked past the kitchen, where he was chopping vegetables for dinner, I saw it. The way he froze for just a second, his knife hovering above the cutting board. It was quick, but I noticed. His eyes flicked up, and when they met mine, something unspoken passed between us. We ate dinner on the terrace that night. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the backyard. I could feel his gaze on me, even when I wasn't looking. His compliments were subtle, hidden beneath the surface of normal conversation. "You've really grown up, Mia. You look more like your mother every day." It was innocent enough, but the way he said it? It sent chills down my spine. The next morning, things went back to normal. Mom came home, and Jason was the perfect husband again. But something had shifted between us. I felt it every time he entered a room, every time his hand brushed against mine just a little too long, every time his eyes lingered a second too late. And I knew this wasn't in my head. Weeks passed, and the tension only grew. Jason found small ways to be around me when Mom wasn't, helping me with homework, offering to drive me to school when Mom was busy. It was subtle, but I felt the walls closing in, the lines blurring between right and wrong. Then came the weekend that changed everything. Mom had to travel again, another family thing. Jason and I were left alone in the house, just like before. But this time, I wasn't nervous. I was curious. I wanted to know how far this would go. That night, I put on the red dress. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted control. Maybe I wanted to feel powerful. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to see if he'd finally crossed the line I knew we were both dancing around. But that night wasn't the beginning. It was just the breaking point. And if you think that was bad, you have no idea what came next. After that night, things didn't just return to normal. They couldn't. The tension between Jason and me didn't fade, it sharpened. Every glance, every touch, every moment we were alone felt charged, like we were both waiting for something to happen, though neither of us dared to cross that invisible line. Yet, Mom's work trips became more frequent, and even when she was home, she worked late. That left Jason and me alone more often than it should have. At first, it felt like coincidence, but eventually, it felt like something more, something intentional. One night, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The wind howled against the windows, and the rain hammered the roof like it was trying to break through. Then, the power went out. Total darkness swallowed the house, leaving nothing but the sound of the storm outside and the pounding of my heart inside my chest. Jason found me in the kitchen, fumbling for candles in the drawer. "You okay?" His voice was calm, as always, but in the dark, it felt closer. More intimate. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to keep my hands steady as I lit the candle. The soft glow illuminated his face, casting shadows that made his features look sharper, more intense. We sat at the kitchen table, the flickering candlelight between us. He told me stories about his travels, places he'd been before he met my mom. His voice was low, soothing, and for a while, I let myself forget how complicated everything had become. I found myself laughing at his jokes, leaning in just a little too close, hanging on to his every word. Then, as he passed me a flashlight, his fingers brushed against mine. It was a simple touch, innocent on the surface. But the warmth from his skin lingered long after the flashlight was in my hand. I felt my breath catch, and when I looked up, his eyes were already on me. Not with surprise, not with guilt, but with something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. Neither of us said anything. But in that silence, something shifted. After that night, Jason became more present in small, subtle ways. He'd find excuses to be near me, helping with homework, asking about my day, offering to drive me to school when Mom was busy. At first, I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was working on a project for school and needed a flash drive. Jason wasn't home, but I knew he kept one in his office. His door was always locked, but that day, it wasn't. I told myself it was harmless. I'd grab the flash drive and be out in seconds. But curiosity got the better of me. His office was meticulously organized, everything in its place. I found the flash drive easily enough, but as I was about to leave, I noticed a small, locked box tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't stop myself. The key was in the drawer above it, hidden beneath a stack of papers. When I opened the box, my breath hitched in my throat. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. All of me. They weren't the kind of photos you'd expect from a stepfather. They were taken when I wasn't looking, when I thought I was alone. In my room. In the bathroom. Somewhere of me sleeping. I stared at them, my hands trembling. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick and suffocating. This wasn't just a game. This wasn't harmless flirtation. This was a trap. I shoved the photos back into the box, locked it, and put everything exactly where I found it. But nothing felt the same after that. I couldn't unsee what I saw. I couldn't unknow what I knew. And the worst part? I didn't know how to escape. Because Jason wasn't just watching me anymore. He was waiting. And deep down, I realized so was I. After I saw those photos, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, images of myself when I thought I was alone, vulnerable. I felt like my skin didn't belong to me anymore. The walls of the house seemed to shrink around me, suffocating. But the worst part wasn't just the invasion of my privacy, it was him, Jason. He acted like nothing had happened. Like we were still playing the same innocent game of lingering glances and subtle touches. But his eyes told a different story. They weren't just watching me now, they were waiting. I tried to avoid him. I stayed in my room as much as possible, headphones in, pretending to study. But no matter how hard I tried, he always found a way to be near me. In the kitchen when I went for a snack. In the living room when I tried to watch TV. Even just walking down the hall, I'd feel his presence before I even saw him. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, pretending to read a book, though I hadn't turned a page in over 10 minutes. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get a moment of peace. But then, I heard the door creak open behind me. "You've been tense lately, Mia." Jason's voice was smooth, almost casual. But I felt the undercurrent of something darker in it. He stepped onto the porch, a glass of wine in each hand. He set one down on the table beside me and took the chair across from mine. I didn't look up from my book. "Stay calm," I told myself. "Don't let him see you're afraid." "I figured you might need something to help you relax," he added, nodding toward the glass. I forced a tight smile. "I'm fine." He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "You know, Mia, I can always tell when you're lying." His words sent a chill down my spine. I kept my eyes on the pages, pretending to read, but I could feel his gaze burning into me. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. After a while, he stood up, taking his glass with him. But as he passed by my chair, he leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "You don't want your mom to find out, do you?" he whispered, his voice low and smooth, but laced with menace. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't move. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. When he finally walked back inside, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, I tried to text Mom. I wanted to tell her everything. But every time I picked up my phone, I felt like Jason was watching, like he knew exactly what I was doing. And I was terrified of what he'd do if he found out. The days passed in a blur of fear and anxiety. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every creak of the floorboards. Jason's presence was everywhere, even when he wasn't in the room. It was like he had embedded himself into the walls of the house, into my mind. I started to plan an escape. I didn't know where I'd go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I waited for the right moment, for a night when Jason wasn't home. But that moment never came. He was always there, always one step ahead. One evening, I thought I had my chance. Jason said he was going to the store, and for once, I believed him. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway, then grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with whatever I could find, some cash, my phone, a change of clothes. But as I opened my bedroom door, there he was. Jason stood in the hallway, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes dark and cold. "Going somewhere?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made my blood run cold. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I was just going to a friend's house," I stammered, trying to sound casual. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. "You think you can just leave," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw it, the real him. The mask was gone, and what was left was terrifying. "This isn't over, Mia," he murmured, taking another step forward. "You don't get to walk away from this." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was trapped, and I knew it. Jason reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek in a mockingly gentle gesture. "We've come too far for that." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. Jason wasn't just a threat to me, he was a threat to Mom. And if I didn't find a way out, he'd ruin both of us. But escape wouldn't be easy. Because Jason wasn't going to let me go without a fight, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to win. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating as Jason took another slow step toward me. His eyes, once calm and composed, were now dark and wild, filled with something I didn't recognize. Something dangerous. It was a trap from the very beginning, he whispered, his voice low and menacing. He was close enough now, but I could feel his breath on my skin, the heat of his presence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I froze, my mind racing, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I thought this was the end. I thought there was no way out. But then, something happened. The door burst open with a sharp crack, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I gasped, my eyes snapping to the doorway. And there she was, Nan. She didn't look confused or scared like I expected. No, her eyes were hard, filled with a cold determination I had never seen before. She wasn't here to ask questions. She was here because she knew. Jason, she said, her voice steady and cutting through the thick tension like a knife. The game is over. Jason froze. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes of fear. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. Mom raised her phone, and I saw the screen glowing. There was a recording playing, and from the few seconds I heard, I knew it was everything. Every word, every whisper, every game. You thought you were manipulating us, Jason, she continued, stepping further into the room. But it was us playing you. Jason's face drained of color. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He was trapped, and he knew it. Mom didn't wait. She pulled out her phone and dialed. The sound of her voice calling the police was both surreal and grounding. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But it wasn't over. Not yet. When the police arrived, it was like the house itself exhaled. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the walls, casting everything in a surreal glow. Jason sat on the couch, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face a blank mask. But I could see it in his eyes, the realization that his perfect little world had crumbled. Mom stayed close to me, her arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders. I could feel the tension in her body, the way she was barely holding herself together. But her grip was firm, steady. She was here. She had always been here. As the officers led Jason out of the house, he turned his head, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. There was no warmth there, no regret, just cold calculation. But I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, unblinking, until he was gone. The door closed behind him, and the house was quiet again. But the silence felt different now. Not suffocating, just empty. Later that night, after the police were gone and the adrenaline had worn off, Mom and I sat in the kitchen, the same place where so much of this had started. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the old clock on the wall. "I'm sorry," Mom whispered, her voice breaking the silence. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't cried yet. "I should have seen it sooner." I shook my head. "It's not your fault." But we both knew the truth was more complicated than that. She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I knew something was off," she admitted quietly, "but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe I brought someone like that into our lives." I squeezed her hand. "You saved me, Mom." She finally let the tears fall then, silent but steady. And I let mine fall too. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews, therapy sessions, and awkward conversations with people who didn't know what to say. Everyone had their version of the story, but none of them knew what it really felt like. The weight of it, the fear, the betrayal. Mom threw herself into the legal process, determined to make sure Jason paid for what he did. She was relentless, refusing to let him slip through the cracks. Watching her fight for me, for us, gave me a strength I didn't know I had. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I still woke up gasping, the phantom sound of Jason's voice echoing in my mind. Other days, I felt like I was floating, disconnected from everything around me. But through it all, Mom was there. We were there for each other. Months later, when the trial finally came, I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap. Jason sat across the room, looking as composed as ever. But I saw through it. I saw the cracks in his facade. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "You thought you could control me," I said, my eyes locked onto his. "But you were wrong. I'm not your victim. I'm not your game." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes break. And that was enough. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming my life. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mom wrapped her arm around me. "It's over," she whispered. But I knew it wasn't really over, because the scars Jason left wouldn't fade overnight. But I also knew something else. We were stronger than him. And this time, the game was truly over. But in the end, I realized something important. The real game wasn't about Jason controlling me. It was about me finding the strength to break free. And I did.